Today we're going to be replacing the rear main seal on this engine, and this is actually the engine out of the rally car. This is what I've been racing on for a couple of years, and this is actually the stock motor out of the car, and it's got 160, 170,000 miles. And if you saw the video on how to replace a clutch, there's a little bit of seeping from the rear main seal. Well, this engine is back out. We pulled it out so that we could upgrade to a new race motor, and this is going in the daily driver now, so we want to get all these leaks taken care of. And as you can see, the leak has really developed and gotten quite a bit worse. And actually, it doesn't appear like the rear main seal is leaking a whole lot more than it was, but the oil separator plate now has some leaking. So we're going to go ahead and seal up that oil separator plate while we're in there and go ahead and replace the rear main seal. So if you have the clutch off and there's any kind of leaking at all or your engine's higher mileage, I recommend resealing all this and taking care of it. So that's what we'll do today. With the back of these engines, because everything's spinning, it really throws oil all over the place, so it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what was leaking. But there's not quite as much oil as I expected from the rear main seal. But there's tons of oil over here near the bottom of this oil separator plate, so I suspect that that's probably leaking. And we'll go ahead and replace that and seal up all these plates back here while we're at it. So the first most important thing is we got to get this as clean as possible, because we're actually going to be opening up the engine and we don't want anything falling in there. Alright, we've got everything all cleaned up here. All the loose debris is off, so nothing's going to fall into the engine. One thing I was remembering with the cover plate for the wrist pin access hole here, there's actually an O-ring on the back side of this plate, so I'm not going to bother resealing that. That O-ring should be nice and sealed. Some people will add some RTV, but we're going to leave that alone. We're just going to focus on the rear main seal and the oil separator plate. We're going to start with the rear main seal, and there's a special tool for removing this. A wood screw. I actually saw this on YouTube as a cool trick. Haven't done it yet. Most of those videos cut to the end and the seal looks all mangled, so I'm going to show you the whole thing. So when we drill into this, we're going to start with just one hole here. We may have to drill several and slowly pry it out. There is space behind the seal, but be careful that you don't plunge all the way through into the block. There we go, nice little hole. One thing when you're prying on this, you can use a claw hammer or pry bar, whatever works best for you. Be careful when you're prying on here. The surface isn't critical, but you don't want to mar it up because that is where your flywheel hits. So we're just going to use a piece of scrap steel here and see if we can't pry up on it. And also when you're prying, you want to try and pull square to the screw, so you're pulling it straight out rather than bending it over. So we'll see if this works or not. Well,
or not.
Step one didn't work. Let's try another hole. So a lot of the videos you see online, there's actually a whole ton of holes in these seals, so I'm guessing this is a common problem where they tear out. So we're just going to keep working on this, and hopefully it'll come out. I'm using a plastic wedge here this time, see if I can get a little bit different angle. Oh, pulled that one out too. Let's try a different one. There you go. That worked. Basically did the same thing. The only thing I tried to do a little different is I drilled the hole a little bit closer to the outside so that it would hopefully grab onto the metal ring a little bit better. And then I used a little bit of jerking motion there so that it popped it loose. And there you go. It came right out. It worked. Alright, we got a nice new seal here. We're going to put it with the groove side going in. We're going to put just a little bit of oil on the inner surface to help it slide over the crank better. One thing to keep in mind, the groove in here is really deep. The seal doesn't go all the way in. You want the seal to stop even with the case housing here. So when we put this in, we're going to tap it in and just be really careful to make sure to stop. If it goes all the way in, you're going to have to pull it out because it actually blocks oil passages. So one thing I found with these seals, because they're so rigid, if you push really hard on one side or even try and work around, sometimes it'll tilt that in and want to push the seal all the way in. So just be really careful. I got this started here. We're going to try and square this up before we go any further. I'm just going to use a block of wood here and tap it in. You can see it's starting to slowly go in now. Just have to be really patient and kind of work this in. And again, make sure we don't push this in too far. You're not supposed to stick your hand in front of the camera while I'm filming. So using the block of wood, I've been able to slowly work this in. We still have a little bit to go. And we're just going to slowly work this around a little bit at a time until it's nice and flush. And that's nice and even with the crankcase there, so that should be good to go. And our rear main seal is done. So now we'll go ahead and take this oil separator plate off and get that resealed. On these screws on the oil separator plate, these things can be really tight and stuck in there. So I'm going to use a screwdriver that has a hex end on it so I can get a wrench, get some leverage. If it doesn't come off easy, I can also kind of give this a little bit of a bop and that'll hopefully break them free. Trick with these Phillips, you got to really push in hard so you don't strip them out. So either have a helper on the other side of the engine pushing back, or if this is still in the car, it'll be easier that way. And hopefully we can pry this off. If not, there's a lip here, one at the bottom and one on this side. We're going to try and really carefully pry this off with a screwdriver. Launch this thing on the floor. There you go. There's your oil separator plate. We'll clean this flange up really good, clean up the plate, and we'll get it resealed. So on the engine side of things, we want to really get this flange nice and clean. We can't just spray brake cleaner in here because there are oil passages and it'll end out inside the engine. So I'm just going to spray a little bit on a paper towel here, and then I'm going to use this to carefully clean this flange off. And there is some kind of buildup of gunk in here. You may want to try and wipe some of that out, but again, just be very careful that it doesn't fall into the engine. So I'm going to apply a really thin layer of ultra black RTV. Some people use the ultra gray. Some people like the Fuji Bond, the Subaru factory stuff. All of it seems to work. But we're just going to apply a very thin layer all the way around the outside here. And then we're going to screw it on hand tight, let it sit for an hour, and then crank it down per the directions on the RTV. So it's been about an hour. We're going to use our wrench and make sure these are nice and snug. Just kind of starting in the middle here and working my way out. You don't want to get crazy on tightening them. It is an aluminum block that you're tightening into. Just one last double check of these first ones. Just make sure the whole thing didn't tighten down. And that should do it. So that was a nice simple project, especially if you've already got the clutch off of the car. If there's any kind of seeping on that rear main seal, go ahead and replace it. Same thing with the oil separator plate. If there's any kind of oil or you got a higher mileage motor like this one, just go ahead and reseal it while you're in there. And this motor is ready to go. We're going to throw it back in the daily driver because I've got a new race motor for the race car, and we're really looking forward to some exciting races this year. So stay tuned, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.